And I think this is running. Wake up. Wake up. Okay. Here we are with Lazarus. Boy, this is one of the neatest ones. And I told you, I think that Lazarus got left out of the other gospels on purpose because, you know, he was probably still alive, and Mary and Martha were probably still alive when the first three gospels were written. So it's not like they were looking for defamation of character, but they were there. So why write about stuff that is known? And, this obviously, I think when this occurred, we're going to see the results of it. It expanded, well beyond Jerusalem, well beyond the people. But John, when he wrote this, likely Lazarus, Mary, and Martha were dead. Jesus, had died and resurrected. Many of the apostles were already dead. John may have been the last man standing, and the people were asking him, I think, tell us more of the story. Tell us more about what happened. And John's focus is on two things. I mentioned this way back. This is way back when it first started. People call this the signs gospel, the Simeon gospel, and they also call it the festival gospel because there's two. People don't notice it. You would notice it better if you were Jewish, I think, that the festivals are one of the key points. We got Hanukkah mentioned, we got Passover mentioned, we got all it's about the festivals. Every case of the Simeons happened during a festival, except the one, which was the wedding. And the wedding could be considered a type of festival, right? Although it wasn't a huge type festival, it's a type of festival. So it's interesting that all the Simeon and all the main points fall on festivals in John, and John is writing mainly about the Simeon. So tell us more. And these were probably not recorded. We do see some snippets of it in the other Gospels, but they probably weren't recorded because, like I said, what do you not record? Yeah, what everybody knows. And if everybody knows, I mean, the man born blind, right? I mean, that was so big that the Pharisees couldn't hide it, right? And it's pouring over into the Lazarus account. And, the wedding at Cana, right? The wine. I mean, that was really the first active miracle that we hear about. And what do you think that did, right? In affecting, the whole of the people and what they were thinking about Jesus. So I think all these, if you just say, people want to say that John is a different gospel. Well, I don't think it's a different gospel. I just think it's adding, like I said, all the people from his time were saying, well, we want more. And here's the more. So we got old Lazarus. And remember, back when Jesus did the miracle of the bread and fishes, right? He fed 5,000, and the whole deal was my body, my sarx. My body is the bread, the sarx. I am the bread, he said. Wow. And then in the man born blind, we get this huge thing about suke, the suke. So now, I don't know how this works, and maybe you can think about it philosophically. I think the hearers are thinking about this philosophically. For some reason, the idea of sarks and bread fit within the miracle context of feeding the 5,000. Maybe it was because the bread, fed the people, right? It was like, it's like the body of the creator, the creation, right? Feeding the people. But for some reason, the sarx was the focus of that. In the man born blind, the focus was suke. That Jesus would lay down his suke, and for some reason, the suke, the thought, the power of thinking was the element that produced or create or was enabled the man born blind to be healed. I mean, that's the impression you get from the arguments, from the logos, right? Now, how that works, I don't know. I mean, maybe that requires more dedicated study and more thought philosophically. But do you see what's happening with Lazarus? Jesus snorts like a wild horse to his pneuma. That leads us back to old Nicodemus. You must be born again. Oh, wow. In some ways, Lazarus is going to be born again physically. And pneuma is the focus when Jesus talks to Nicodemus. Pneuma is suddenly the focus. Our Bible translates, Jesus was toiled in his spirit. But I showed you in the Greek, it means he snorted like a wild horse down to his spirit, down to his pneuma. It's not just spirit. We get, I don't know if our translators think they're protecting us or protecting our ideas. They translate sarx, they usually get right. It's the body, right? But then we get suke, and you go, well, suke isn't exactly your life. Suke is thoughts. And then they get to pneuma. And, many times you see suke is spirit and pneuma is spirit. They're two different words. But you give me the same translation. We're going to try and we're going to try and get back to what it says. So the previous verse we had, certainly Jesus snorting anew like an angry horse into himself is coming to the sepulchral monument. But it was a cave and a stone was resting upon it, against it. And then we get this, and he says, take the stone away. Take the stone away, he said. And Martha says in the same statement, but Lord, by this time it's a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days. And of course, the King James is pretty close to that. Jesus said, take you away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto the Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. He makes a logical argument. Jesus, you take the lithon. She makes a logical argument to him. The female sibling of the same womb of the telekutos, of having brought to consummation the end goal, Martha, Kyrie, supreme in authority, even now, he gives out an odor. He gives an odor. Fourth day, assigning a reason, it is. And Jesus makes the logical argument. You take up the stone. Martha, the female sibling of the same womb, sister of he having brought to consummation. It's really interesting the word they use here. Boy, this almost feels like English, right? In English, they never say somebody died, right? They say they passed away or, met their maker or, right? We have more euphemisms for death in English than probably any other language in the world. For some reason, we don't like to say that people died or whatever. It's very interesting. We'll talk about the way they died, but we just don't like to talk about death. Look at this. They put a euphemistic statement here in Greek of he having brought to consummation the end goal. I don't think that's specifically a euphemism as much as it's an explanation, right? Because Lazarus has reached the end goal. He's passed through the goalposts. He made the touchdown. He's there. You may be irritated about being resurrected. Just saying, I wish we got more of what Lazarus thought about this, because maybe Lazarus was up there dining,
Why did you bring me back?
Yeah, he's with God, and God gave him a big fat Cuban cigar and gave him a really good glass of wine, and he had a scotch, and he's sitting there eating roast beef, and he's like, boy, this is the best ever. And all of a sudden, it's like, wait a second. I'm going back. Now, I guess Mary and Martha are good cooks, but at least Martha was. But still, okay, we got a different thing here. So I think it's interesting that he makes this statement. I've got some explanations for the words, which are okay. Take up, take away the thing, that's all right. the teleteo, this is like telos, right? Properly bring to consummation and in gold. It's a different word than telos, but it comes from telos, which is very interesting. The reason this is even going to be more interesting is because what's the last word that Jesus is going to tell us on the cross?
It's finished.
Yeah, telestai, which is also a telos form word. So there's a parallel here. Yeah.
I was going to say the end goal could also mean Jesus intended for him to die. That's why he could have gone there earlier and saved him. But his goal was for him to die so he could raise him.
I think you're right on the money, and possibly a reason that John was finally recording this right for the Teen Hodos. And by the way, Teen Hodos is, we're going to see some tricks. There's some points where Teen Hodos is mentioned, but they don't use exactly the words Teen Hodos. Because I think by this time, Teen Hodos was kind of a negative connotation, right? In the earlies, Teen Hodos, everybody's happy, and you find that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, big time. But in John, you don't see Teen Hodos. You don't see it directly. You see it indirectly. But anyway, the point is that I think that we get to this. There may have been some people complaining, like the Judeans did, right, or going to do, that Jesus waited for Lazarus to die. You let him die. And then he wrote, we're going to find out, he raised him from the dead, right? So, yeah, it was probably the plan of God, right? God was working through it, and Jesus, of course, is meandering along. He knows what's going to happen. Yeah, Dave?
This is kind of the equivalent of who sinned, this man or his parents. No, it was prepared ahead of time for me to do this act. And the same thing is with Lazarus. It was prepared ahead of time that Jesus would raise him from the dead.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that, the man born blind, the foreshadowing is beautiful in that, and it's not a novel, it's an account, right? But still the foreshadowing is wonderful. John tells us the disciples said, who sinned, this man or his parents? And that's the setup, right? And we find out that neither. The answer is neither. It's not like Luther. What's the answer? It's always Jesus. No, it's neither. That's really interesting. So the answer isn't always Jesus, although the answer was Jesus. But I think it's interesting that in Lazarus, we don't really get a logos statement, right, per se. You could probably dig one out, of the original, because, they sent for Jesus, right? And he loved him like a shield warrior. This is the first time we hear about phileo with Jesus. So how close is Jesus to Lazarus? Even compared to the disciples, right? Yeah.
It seems like I recall reading somewhere that John was the only apostle that died of natural causes, that all the rest were basically killed along the way.
Right.
And John was also young, I think, in Jesus' ministry time. So a lot of time has passed here. And I think the notion of people are asking, there's more people interested, and he's filling out the other accounts.
Yeah.
And I think some of that seems like attributed to the fact that he's been around longer. And there's a greater question about, well, who was this guy? What did he do in Teen Hodos? And it's exactly what you're saying here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Tammy and I were talking about this. In the Bible, there is a whole lot of information, okay, in the Catholic Church that are tradition that we know comes out of some of the documents. Now, whether there's pseudographia, that is, stuff that was written later that was made up, or actual accounts, or even information that might have been passed traditionally and then somebody finally wrote it down, like Veronica, for example, which is interesting. That's a Roman name. That's not a Greek name. Veronica, per se, but yet Veronica was supposedly the name of the woman who had the blood in Matthew. And yet Veronica is also the name of the woman who gave Jesus the drink right on the stages of the cross. And it's tradition in the Catholic Church. A lot of the names we know through tradition, being passed down, some of them from Archcode documents. Now, don't reject all this information. We think, or there's tradition that John took Mary to Ephesus, and there is Mary's house, and you can see Mary's house at Ephesus, where John supposedly lived with Mary, in the last stages of her life, and then the last stages of his life. Are these true accounts? Well, we don't know if they're true or not, but there is some historical data, and the Vatican's closed up the Archcode documents and a lot of the other documents. They're not sharing them. The only reason we know the Archcode documents is because that guy in the 1800s, that preacher, pastor, went there, who was a knowledgeable about Latin and Greek, and basically copied them by hand. He borrowed them and copied them. It's before Xerox printers, right? That would have really helped. But he made copies, and we actually have copies. But after they were published, the Vatican disappeared them. They're not. They're in the what do you call it in Harry Potter? The off limits. Part of the library, right? You got to have a big key to get in there. They're down there. They're someplace in the Vatican. And, the Vatican has really not allowed us to see a lot of the documents that they may be pseudographia, they may be real. The problem is that, like, for example, and I've told you this before, they may have one or two copies, or they may have late date copies of the documents, just like Phineas and Euripides and Caesar and Plato, right? They don't have 25,000 copies like they do of the New Testament documents, right? Where you have over 500 copies of Mark, or 500 copies of Matthew, or multiple copies of John, right? So because of that, you can put a stake in it, you can swear that I have an original great source and probably the original words of the New Testament. But yet if you only have one or two or three even, which by the way is most ancient documents, what can you not say? I'm 100% sure, right? You got plenty. You got one copy of Pliny that was copied 1,000 years later than the original. One copy. And in the antiquity, if I have three copies, I'm really happy, right? I'm just saying the Vatican is keeping close hold on these. I think they may have some really authentic and accurate stuff, but they're keeping close hold because they don't want to dilute the purity of the New Testament. Yes, sir.
The Lutheran theologians call this adiaphoria. It's something that you can believe or not believe, and it doesn't affect the scriptural reference.
Adiaphora, yeah, they might. I always wonder about the way we think about things, because the apocryphal documents were in our Bible until 1826, and there is no Luther Bible, and there is no Bible that did not have the apocryphal documents in it. Now, some of the apocryphal documents are a little bit iffy. They're a little bit pseudographia. The Episcopalians, the Anglicans, rather, say that they are good for spiritual lesson, but they are not for spiritual authority. I believe that's the correct way they're said. And I think the Lutherans handle it that way too. But because they don't give us our Apocrypha, we don't have Maccabees 1, at least, and 1 and 2 would probably be really good, plus a lot of other wisdom documents, right? And a lot of the documents about, my point is this: although we do have more copies and better bibliographical proof of the Apocrypha than probably some of the Archcode documents, some of the Archcode documents may be better sources than some of the apocryphal documents. Yeah, let's go back to the Apocrypha. At least we taught it because there's good stuff in there, right? Anyway, I think it's interesting. Like I've said before, the Catholic Church says that if I know Kidden got a new document that had the same authentic quality of the New Testament, they would accept it historically because they're in the history, right? Where we would probably say, well, since it didn't come down through the time, we would probably not accept it. It's interesting. I say if it's historical, let's use it. Let's see what's in it, right? Because it may be worthwhile, right? It may have some worthwhile information that would help us to know more. And that's what you want. That's what you want. You just want to know more. Everybody wants to know more. Let's see. The odor, I think, is really interesting too. It's an odor either good or bad. It's to emit a smell, basically, is the word in Greek. Also. And Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Yeah, that's pretty close. The King James says, Jesus said to her, said I not to thee that if thou wouldst believe, thou shouldst see the glory of God? And this was his statement to her. She said, I am convinced, right? He makes a logical argument to her. Jesus, didn't I not say to you that because, in case that you would be persuaded, you will stare at that which evokes good opinion of a God. Jesus makes a logical argument to her. Said I not to you that in case that you would be persuaded, you will stare at what evokes good opinion, doxa of the God. I fixed it, right? The English translated it, but I fixed it, doxin, right? Doxa. Who's interested in doxa? The Romans, right? And we see this word used over and over again in John. What's interesting is, what did Mary say, or Martha? Mary and Martha. They said, "I am persuaded." Right? Now, remember I told you we're not sure who's there. Martha's there, though. We know Mary's there, right? And where did Mary come from, or Martha come from? He doesn't say that Martha went with Mary, right? But all of a sudden we have, who's there? Let's see. Martha. So I'm saying, this is classical and typical Greek. Who's there? Well, until they speak or say something, you're not sure. Probably when Mary, remember it says that Martha came secretly to Mary and told her, and then it says Mary got up, went out through the house, the Judeans went with her, but it doesn't say that Martha went with her. Who went with her? Martha went with her. We end up with them at the sepulcher, and Martha makes a statement, and Jesus says, don't you remember I told you, if you're convinced that everything's cool? Jesus makes a logical argument to her. Said I not to you that in case that if you would be persuaded, convinced of a logical argument, you will stare at what evokes good opinion. And what's very interesting about this is, let's see, what did I even say? You would believe you should see the glory of God. Okay, remember this opsio word, right? The NIV and the King James translates that as many times no, sometimes see. It means in Greek to stare at and perceive, to have knowledge of. But yet there are other Greek words when it means knowledge. So in other words, he's telling her, it's okay in our English, right? Thou should see the glory of God. But he's really telling her, you shall stare at. What does that mean? You're going to see with physical eyes the glory of God. Which, okay, I'm telling you, Greek is concrete. So what's the only answer to this? That they're going to see physically Lazarus raised from the dead. Now, the Greek, the Greeks are like that, right? The Hebrews, on the other hand, You going to share the glory of God? They're all euphemists. You know, Martha, oh, Jesus, something great's going to happen. I don't know what it is, right? It's still a mystery to them. It's a mystery. But all the Greeks are going, yeah. We know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen. It's almost like you're telling a story before the story happens. So they took the stone away, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. Wow, this is an interesting statement. They took away the stone from the place where the dead was laying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. They raised up, lift up, certainly or accordingly, the lithon, the stone. But Jesus, he raised up Aaron, lifted up his ophthalmos, his eyes. Okay, where have we heard about eyes before? The man born blind. Jesus can obviously see. This is one of the few cases where it says Jesus lift up his eyes. He's lifting his eyes up to heaven. Very interesting statement here. Lifts up his eyes, ophthalmos, upward. And by the way, this is the same word usage that is used in the man born blind. When he could see, he lifted up his eyes, ano, upward. And he said, Pater, Eucharisto. Eucharisto. What's Eucharisto? Good blessing, good greeting. I, having been grateful, good gratefulness to you, that are because you have heard of me. You have heard of me. The of me is the genitive form, the possessive form. What I think is really interesting is look at the word Eucharisto. What do we call Eucharist? The communion. Yeah. Whoa, Eucharisto. I just love this. According to they raised up, lift up the stone. But Jesus raised up, lifted up his eyes upward. And he said, Father, I, having been grateful, good gratefulness to you, because you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. It continues, right? But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they will believe that you sent me. All right, this is obviously another proof text that Jesus is God. Let's see what it says here in the Greek. I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, they may believe that thou hast sent me. All right, let's see what that says in the Greek. I, ego. We got an ego. We don't have an ego in me. We got an ego. But I saw with physical eyes, idein, hoti, that are because every wind at all times of me you hear, contrariwise, through the throng, the standing all around, peristona, I said in order that they may be persuaded that are because you, me, you set apart. Here's the Greek. Here's the translation. But I saw with physical eyes, because every wind at all times you hear me. Now, the only way that at all times you hear me is you're me, right? Contrariwise, through the throng standing all around, I said in order that they may be persuaded that you set me apart. It's interesting the word is dia, through the throng standing all around me. In other words, Jesus is not talking to the stone. Who's he talking to? He's not just talking to Mary and Martha either, right? He's talking to the people. And notice it calls it a throng. In other words, it ain't one, it ain't two, it's like a bunch, right? These are the same words that were used in the 5,000. Not only there's 5,000 folks here, but there's a lot of people. A lot of people. Before, the impression was, well, there are enough to fit in the house. I expect there were people, you know, they're wailing, they're going through the thing, right? What's his name in the supposed head Roman guy in Capernaum, the chosen guy, he goes, you know, I can't stand the wailing. You know, no death. Don't hurt him because I can't stand the wailing. It's, you know, obnoxious, right? And it was obnoxious. It's Jairus' daughter. But anyway, that's the Jewish, you know, funeral or death ceremonies. So remember, they're all wailing. And when Jesus cries gently, they're amazed that he loved them that much, right? In any case, because he wasn't a paid wailer, I guess.
But it was snorting like a horse.
But he was snorting like a horse. I just think that's really a cool picture, right?
I'm kind of glad they left that out.
Oh well, so it is. Let's see. Then when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Let's see what it says here. And when he had thus spoken, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And these he having said, of a tone of large or great tone, he cried out, and he cried out with a loud screaming or shrieping, especially with inarticulate sounds, shouted a loud, inopportune cry, croaking, "Lazarus, you come hither," of a place, of a time, outside of doors. Exo. This is really cool. And these he having said of a great tone, he shouted with a loud, importunate cry, "Lazarus, you come hither outside of doors." Why is this significant that he says, "Exo, come outside of doors"?
Everyone could see.
Well, I don't have all the verses. I probably should have grabbed all the verses and showed them to you. I showed them to you before about exo, about putting them out of doors. Remember, in The Man Born Blind, the parents were afraid to speak up because what did the Pharisees and Sadducees say they would do to people?
Put him out of the synagogue.
Exo, out of doors, outside of the synagogue. Jesus said in The Man Born Blind, "I will never turn you out of doors." Exo, right? And now Jesus tells Lazarus to come, exo, out of doors. So it's, I said this is in some ways a joke or an analogy. It's a parallel. It relates directly to the previous incident. You never know this except for the specific word usage in the Greek of this. What kind of word is this? Not adjective. Of this. Not adverb. With to preposition. It's a preposition. But in English, we don't have a preposition exactly like this, right? We have out, but it uses a preposition. But this preposition in Greek means out of doors. It means come from an interior place, right? Which is really kind of cool. And the connection is to all those previous accounts, all those other logos. And Jesus says, come out of doors. Like I said, I don't think we see enough of the humor. There is humor in this, and you know why there's humor. Why is there humor in this situation, do you think? Why do you think that the author and Jesus would want to project humor in this situation?
What is the humor?
Just to add some levity to a bad situation.
Well, you see this in other cultures, and you also see it in English. When you have a very tense situation, like for example in a movie or whatever, the main person might throw a throwaway, right? A joke, or in Monty Python, right? It's only a flesh wound, right? Yes, sir.
Well, here you have this, as you said, a very tense situation, and his use is saying, "Lazarus, come on, get out of here."
Yeah.
It's more of that. It's a command, but it might be put in such a way that culturally we don't necessarily read it that way. That it's not that serious. It's, come on, get out of here.
Jesus,
Show yourself.
Jesus could have used other words. John could use other words. Jesus, I think this is a direct account. I think John is recording exactly what Jesus said. And I think, and who would not remember this, right? But I think the word Jesus used is exactly this word, to tie back intentionally, but also as a reliever. Lazarus, come out of doors, right? It's like, and also, again, I bring it back to you, Lazarus is sitting there with God, right? right? He's having the great feast. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, sorry, God, I got to go back. Right? Right?
Who's calling?
Who's calling? Who's calling? The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. There's more of this, of course. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound around with a napkin. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. He came or went. The Tephnekos, he having been dead, Tephnekos, he having been dead, then must he be in bonds. It says bonds. The feet and the hands, two bands, grave clothes, and the opsis, sight, appearance of him, a handkerchief tied around. He makes a logical argument to them. Jesus, you loose and unbind him, and appheta, you send away him to lead under, to withdraw. He having been dead came, the feet and the hands being in bonds with bands, and the sight, appearance of him, a handkerchief tied around. Jesus makes a logical argument to them. You loose and unbind him, and you send him away to lead under. In other words, go back to his house. There are reasons for that. If you remember, let's see, ophthalmi, there's a lot of words that I wanted to look up. Okay. Lazarus raised from the dead. He says, let him withdraw. And we don't get we get some more detail, but not a whole lot of detail about Lazarus per se. If you remember, one of the most important things to the Greeks, Romans, Hebrews, if a ghost came, what can a ghost not do?
Anything physical.
Yeah, they can't eat anything physical. I think Jesus had them remove them because he wanted them to get close, right, and see that he was alive and that he was, walking around. Obviously, would draw to his house because, I think the next step is feeding. Now, the author doesn't tell us all this. We know this culturally about them, right? But, one of the questions they might ask, well, is he a ghost? Well, if you go up and touch him and feel him, he's not a ghost. Now he's undead. Look, why do we even have all these ideas in our own culture? Like about undead and other things, right? Did the undead exist, though, before Christ?
Well, that word, Tephneko, that you had up there,
Yeah.
having been dead, I mean, how does that come up in conversation? Or how do they use that word?
That's a great question. I think I have it in here. Let's see. What he did is they took a verb, right? And the verb itself means to be dead. And what they did is they put the verb into the past tense perfect. Okay, I know you didn't come here for a grammar lesson, but like past tense perfect, plusquamperfekt in Deutsch, right, is having been, right? Had been, has been, having been. So they took a verb that was death and turned it into the plusquamperfekt, into the perfect tense in English or in Greek. Okay? I mean, you can do that.
It just seems strange. They don't have a word for resurrection, but they can build a word here.
Having been dead.
He came to lunch.
Yeah, he came to lunch. Ooh, very good, very good. Yeah. Resurrection, right, means to be, have been dead. Nekos. I'm not sure this word is used at any other point. because it's very interesting. It's just taking dead and changing it into a different verb tense. But wow. And by the way, we don't get this when you talk about Jesus, right? It's always, or about raising the dead. It's always Egirios ek nekros or ana whatever ek nekros, right? And yeah, neste ek nekros. So from the dead. Wow. Just very interesting. Yeah, but good. That's a good observation. Point out. But you know, even resurrection. Where did resurrection come from? Resurrection isn't. There's no death in resurrection, right? Resurrection means to be brought back to life from death, but yet it's not like in Latin. I took the Latin for dead and then turned it into a different tense. Yeah.
So what did the Pharisees believe?
The Pharisees, okay, now this is going to really whack the Pharisees. This is going to really cause them problems. Because when are the dead supposed to be raised to life in a Pharisaic viewpoint?
When the Messiah.
But at the end of the time, you know, the Messiah prepares the way, but, you know, at the end time, then all are resurrected physically, right? And now what do we have? A physical resurrection. Whoa. This isn't talking about like spiritual, suke, you know, we're talking about the free will, everything put back into this guy. Sark, suke, pneuma. He's got it all. Whoa. This is exactly, now the Sadducees, what are the Sadducees going to do about this? Sadducees don't believe at all in any kind of resurrection. Boy, this is going to blow their world, right? I'm really sad. We do get, well, we'll see. We get some of this. It's, you know, we get some from this. Because here's the next one, the plot to kill Jesus, right? Therefore, many of the Jews had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. So I told you that I think these guys are all Pharisees, right? Many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did, believed on. You notice they came to Mary. I didn't mention this before. Why would they come? Why might they come to Mary?
Associates of her husband?
What?
Brother?
You know, there's a big piece that we don't know what's going on. You know, Martha's the oldest, well, we presume.
She may not.
She may not have been. She was, you know, did their husbands die? And that's why they were back in, you know, Lazarus' thing. Were they unmarried? The impression we get is Mary is in the Gynoseum, but she's at home and the Judeans are there. Was Mary the woman, you know, was she the woman that was, you know, in the other Gospels that, you know, when she anointed Christ was, you know, the prostitute or whatever? Did Mary have a lot of friends that, you know, she should or shouldn't have had? Were these Pharisees? You know, I'm taking that they're Pharisees. They're in, you know, Lazarus' home, and Mary's in the Gynoseum, separated from them probably by a curtain or a door with a curtain or something, right? But then he goes to say that had visited Mary, or were they courting Mary? Were they there because she was single, and that they were, you know, their intent was to marry her or whatever? Because Lazarus is gone. Who's now in charge of the home? Oh, you know, you wish. John, tell us, right? Tell us these details because we want to know, right? We don't get enough information here. There's a lot that we're missing that maybe culturally, if you were a Hebrew or a Jew or a Greek from that period, you might immediately know what's going on. Or maybe the backstory, right? All the other information that is common knowledge to these people. Maybe it's there. Yeah, Rick.
Well, Lazarus is a rabbi.
I think he was, yeah, the rabbi of Bethany.
And he's died. Now, previously it said that the Judeans came out there.
Yep.
For the mourning or whatever, and of course they probably had the hired mourners as well, and all that stuff. You would expect that there'd be family there,
Mm-hmm.
the sisters. So, but what their status was, we don't know.
Yeah, and maybe Mary was the keeper of the funds. Maybe that's why the Whalers, and maybe that's why she was so well known to them. I don't know. But there's apparently a lot of folks there, right? A lot of folks. And the Mary's, well, we get the impression of Mary's fit. The Jews which came to Mary, it says much, many, often, certainly accordingly, from among the Judeans, they having come or gone off forward to Mary. Kai, they having gazed on a spectacle. Look at the word it used here. Thesemino. They having gazed on a spectacle. Wow. He made or did, and they were convinced to or into him. So, in this miracle, many were convinced. So it did do some of them good, right? In spite of the fact that I love that other Lazarus story, right? That Lazarus was a beggar. Maybe this was like a real parable, like like a pastor parable, right? Jesus was giving a real pastor parable. Lazarus is his friend, the rabbi of Capernaum, and he's using him as an example and says, in this manner, and Lazarus, if someone came back from the dead, according to the rich man, right, then my brothers might believe. And the statement was, they have Moses and the prophets, and that even if a man came back from the dead, they wouldn't believe. Interesting, right? But luckily, many were convinced. Accordingly, many out from among the Judeans, they having come forward to Mary, and they having gazed on a spectacle which he did, they were convinced of a logical argument into him, that is, into Christ. Wow. I think there's okay, we think of this as, you think about it in your thoughts, okay? We're thinking, okay, here's Mary and Martha, and here's the Judeans, and they go out to where the tomb is, and Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. All right. Now, tell me this, riddle me this, Batman. So if you're sitting in front of a tomb and this dead guy's been in there for 4 days, right? And suddenly he comes shuffling out of the tomb in grave clothes, what do you think is going to happen? You think they're going to just stand there?
I think they're scatter.
Yeah. I think you got people, the women and children are running. Some of the guys are running, and Jesus is like, wait, there's probably more of this story than we got. He told them, he probably commanded them, right, to go and take off his grave clothes because they're standing there and it's a spectacle. The Greek words give us the point, right, that we don't seem to imagine.
We've seen too many zombie movies. We're not scared of any of those things.
Well, and if you remember in Ben-Hur, I think it's Ben-Hur, I think isn't Lazarus in Ben-Hur? I think it is. It's in one of those. But, in all the pictures, videos, or the movies we see, right? So Jesus calls Lazarus from the tomb, and he shuffles out, and everybody's sitting there like, oh, right? And there ain't no way. There's no way, man. If you see some guy shuffling out from a tomb, you're not going, oh, Jesus might be going, oh, and Mary and Martha are like, okay, now what's really going on here, right? You think they're like just standing there, like, with their mouths open and praying? It ain't happening, dudes. Just think about how this really would be occurring in the real world. Now, John gives us an account, and I think it's really interesting that his account includes this word. Of course, what do we translate it to be? We say, who had seen these things, which Jesus did. But that's not what the Greek says. It says, they having gazed on a spectacle. Remember all our Greek words we could use? We could use ideo, we could use the other one for stare at, to physically stare at, right? They don't use any of those. Use this word. Yes, sir.
It's interesting that they make a point in verse 44 of John saying, basically expose him, get his so that they could see who it is.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, take those off, open that, get the handkerchief or whatever the word was there.
Because
They can prove it's Lazarus.
well, it could have been somebody else. No, I hope not. How many guys are in there, right? But yeah, I think you're right on, and I think that goes back culturally to, make sure he's not a ghost. You feel him, you touch him, they eat, right? And that way they're not. And by the way, back to the point that nobody has any idea of undead. We have ideas of undead because we got zombie movies and vampire movies and mummy movies, right? Look, nobody even thought this could ever happen. You would not even have mummy movies today except for the resurrection of Christ, right? Because it made it possible as even a trope, right? The trope did not exist until basically Lazarus and a few, until Christ, right? The trope did not exist. The idea of someone coming back from death. The Greeks don't even, in their mythos, nobody came back from death. In the mythos of the Romans, no one came back from death. In the mythos of the Egyptians, no one came back from death. But in the accounts we have, that are eyewitness accounts of Christ, people really, no kidding, came back from death. This is like, whoa, right? Very, talk about, and of course, our language in our Bibles, in our translations, downplay to a degree some of the excitement. But in any case, I think it's really interesting the way it's used here. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. I think they were Pharisees, right? And you remember, I told you, I think that this is just, this is obviously a continuation of the man born blind. And one of the Pharisees of Jesus, I'm telling you, I think was Lazarus. And so you got lots of these Pharisees of Jesus because that was the last point of the man born blind. Are we also blind? Yes, you are. Straight out, flat out. But if you hear my tone, all right, what just happened? Who heard his tone? Yeah, Lazarus heard his tone. And you notice he was not born blind. His eyes were covered. His face was covered with the grave clothes. But yet he still heard Jesus' tone. I think this is beyond a shadow of doubt. Lazarus is a Pharisee. He's one of the Pharisees that was following Jesus. And, that's the direct connection to the man born blind and then to this direct verse here. Some went their ways to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus had done. Some are any person or object, but from out of them they came or went forward to the Pharisees, and they said to them what he made or did, what Jesus made or did. But some person from out of them, it doesn't say many, but there's a plural, but some person from out of them went off forward to the Pharisees, and they said to them what Jesus did. So they're tattling. Well, we knew that anyway, right? Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing, they said. Here is the man performing many signs. Okay, that's pretty, dead. They gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees at council and said, what do we, for this man doeth many miracles? Okay, that's a little bit stronger. Synagogon. Synagogue. That's the word for synagogue. They led together. A synagogue is led together. Certainly or quarterly. The archies, the chief priests, and the Pharisees. Okay. Okay, chief priests. Number one, who are they? They are Sadducees. What do the Sadducees believe about resurrection? There ain't going to be one. Ain't going to be no resurrection, no siree, Bob. And by the way, it says the chief priests. How many chief priests are there?
Well, there's supposed to be one.
There's only one. Yeah, there's only one chief priest, but yet we got what? A gaggle of them. Those Romans are pretty smart. I'll talk about that in a second. They led together the chief priests and the Pharisees sitting together. Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin means the sitting together with. And by the way, the thing together with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. All right, we accurately know how many, well, in the time of Christ, we accurately know how many Pharisees were in the Sanhedrin. Well, there's 72 in the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, right.
But Gamaliel wrote in other sources, we know there were 4. There were only 4 in the time of Christ, right in the beginning of the Acts, after Christ's death and resurrection. We know there's supposed to be 4, and Gamaliel was one of them. You know, he's big time rabbi. He's the rabbi, not the rabbi of rabbis, that's Rabboni, but he's pretty close. But he was, you know, there's 4. So the Sanhedrin gets called. They're mostly Sadducees, but they've got 4 Pharisees. And obviously, what did the Pharisees bring? All their friends and brothers and all the other rabbis, right? So they're bringing them all together. Who they did not invite, they probably didn't invite Jesus or Lazarus. I'm thinking. But anyway, they should have been included, right? But they weren't.
Nicodemus.
Yeah, old Nicodemus is probably in there. You know, we don't know if Nicodemus was a member of the Sanhedrin. It gives us an impression that he might have been, right? But there were only, we know 4. So there's 4 Pharisees in that Sanhedrin at the time of Christ. We don't know how many there were later. After the destruction of Jerusalem, there were probably a lot more Pharisees in the Sanhedrin. Because if you remember, you know, we know that a whole lot of the Sadducees came to Christ. That was recorded in Acts. So the number of the priests were going to Teen Hodos in large numbers. And so you had more Pharisees in the Sanhedrin. Yes, sir.
If you no longer had a temple sacrifice, what good were the priests? They're probably all looking for jobs.
They're all looking for work. And
But
yet,
this was before, in Acts, before the temple was gone.
right.
I believe.
Yeah, you're right. Acts was before. And I think after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, that a lot of them went to Egypt, right? Now Alexandria, right? Exactly. Because there was a temple there, so you keep your work going, right? Or you become an Essene, although the Essenes were white pretty quick. So, you know, yeah, you don't necessarily want to be an Essene. But, you know, in any case, let's see what else we got here. Together with Sanhedrin, and they were making logical argument. What are we to make or do? That is because he, a man, ought many, he makes or does Simeon. These signs, the Simeon, signs. Signs specifically, supernatural or ceremonial indications. Accordingly, the chief priests and the Pharisees led together a sitting together with the Sanhedrin, and they were making a logical argument. What are we to do because he, the man, makes or does many supernatural or ceremonial indications? These are the same terms used for the gathering the excess bread and fish together in feeding the 5,000. You wouldn't know that except for the Greek, right? So John is equating the high priests and the Pharisees with the leftover morsels of food. What do we do to him because he does signs and miracles? What should they be doing?
Worshiping him.
Yeah. I'm like,
Yeah, this is recalls back to the sermon this morning because he was talking about the Jews asking for signs, but Jesus still being a stumbling block. And John's like, he did the signs you were asking for, right?
the guy came back from the dead, and the man, look, you know, I mean, it's like building, you know, I tell you, it's the logos to telos, right? John is building an argument that Jesus is God, and not only is Jesus God, he did these amazing miracles so that you would be convinced that he was God, right? and of the salvation that, we're going to later find out about, right? This whole thing about salvation. Because right now, his salvation is, directed to the people, and he really hasn't talked much about the big point of like the sacrificial lamb. Although at the beginning, what did it say? Behold, the sacrificial lamb of God. That's what John said, right? At the beginning, John the Mercer. Behold, the Lamb of God, the Duran, the sacrificial Lamb of God. That was the foreshadowing. Now John is building his case. He's building his proof text. And the guys who are seeing it ain't believing it. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.
That's, again, once again, if they don't listen to the word, even the great signs, even if you're asking for it, won't convince you